Hi again. So we're going to talk about the international fintech landscape, and I think it's interesting to understand that the world became much more global in the past few years. And we saw that it's much easier for companies, for fintech companies, Israeli companies, to penetrate foreign markets without even being there. Everything is done remotely. We actually got used to it in a way. So COVID-19 changed some things, but it's not just that. I think that there are some fintech trends, and I think Tal touched some of them at the beginning here earlier this morning, that were boosted, really boosted, thanks to COVID-19. And we're going to touch some of these areas that really got a great kick thanks to COVID-19 in the last 2 years. And then I'm going to call on stage two other panelists to further discuss. So I think that the best or the most interesting topic that got really a huge boost thanks to COVID-19 situation is challenger banks, digital banking, and other, I would say, alternatives to the institutionals we have out there. And challenger banks are on the rise for a few years now. We saw that, we saw Monzo, we saw N26, and different examples like Revolut and others that are indicated here in this slide. But we can definitely see that when we had no choice other than using digital payments and digital banking features, when we had no choice, so we actually adopted them as end users. So yeah, challenger banks are on the rise, and we see that, and digital payments as well. It's not just the EMV protocol that just got adopted in Israel in the last 18 months or so, even 12 months or so. It's also the tap and pay that is actually in most of Europe and even in Asia and China and different countries is already established for a few years now. We see that it's got boosted as well. All the digital payments and different remote payments that are being done in different protocols. So it's definitely a topic or subsegment of fintech that got really boosted thanks to the COVID-19 situation. But it's not just that, it's also cyber and biometrics. Nowadays, when you go to a shop, we see definitely also now in different areas of the different shops, when you can buy with face recognition components. You can purchase different products with paying by using your fingerprint. So we see different components, biometrics components that are enabling payments, enabling transactions, and this is something that COVID-19 boosted as well. Not mentioning cybersecurity. Cybersecurity innovations for all the range. It's identity theft, identity management, authentication, anti-fraud, etc., and so forth. So we see that cybersecurity got stronger because everything shifted online. So the cyber threats are much more aggressive. So we see that the cyber defense mechanisms are as well smarter these days. Of course, we can't move forward without mentioning the wealth tech and trading platforms that are out there. Robinhood is from the beginning of 2020, from the beginning of the COVID-19 situation, they offered free usage to their end users on their platform. So we see different trades that are being done in these new platforms, and we can also trade fractional shares. You don't have to buy the whole share. So there are different features that different platforms adopted and offered to end users to make it easier for all of us to trade in the stock market. So this is definitely a topic that got boosted as well. And InsurTech as well. We can't disregard what happened in the InsurTech space. We see different insurance policies. We see cyber insurance, by the way, to answer cyber threats. We see cyber insurance policies that are offered to companies to answer different cyber threats. And we see, of course, health insurance, different health insurance policies that are offered to basically everyone, to end clients, to make it easier for them to overcome different diseases and challenges, as well as COVID-19 situation. Lending platforms, of course, as well, not just P2P lending, but also the, I would say, traditional institutions that are lending money to end clients, and they are offering all kinds of solutions. we saw that it became a bit difficult for different households to hold the regular cash flow activity. So we see that lending platforms are also on the rise, offering different solutions. And cloud computing, of course, everything shifted to cloud. We had AWS here, and we saw that everything is shifted to cloud. And I would say everything, but the banking activity is definitely starting to understand that if you want to adopt the open innovation way of thinking, and if you want to have to be more open to fintechs and to startups in general, we have to go on cloud. And I want to talk about the last topic here before I'll introduce my panelists is, of course, banking as a service. And banking as a service, and we see that as a major phenomenon, is not just offering banking on the go to everybody on the palm of your hand. It's also offering different services that are basically given to us as embedded finance without us even notice. When we pay for a taxi, when we pay for a rent apartment with Airbnb, or when we pay for in the shop. When we do on-the-go payments and we don't even notice that, that's embedded finance, and that's part of the future of fintech as we see it nowadays. And it's definitely got boosted thanks to COVID-19 situation. So without further ado, I want to bring on stage Elmar Bouma from Investing in Holland to join me here, and Clynch from Disruption Banking to further discuss these topics. Guys, join me. Hi. Okay. Yeah. Okay, how are you guys? Everything's okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So, let's start with a short introduction. Thanks for joining me here. And we had some, I would say, overview, a very short overview of what happened. And we're going to talk about the international fintech landscape and what we think is going to happen in the maybe mid-range and long run for fintech in general over the year. So let's start with a short introduction, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Clynch, and I'm a journalist with Disruption Banking, which is a fintech publication based in London. Good day to you. My name is Elmar Bouma. I'm with the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency, based in the Netherlands. Coming to you here in Israel, happy to be here, looking after the fintech sector for our organization and helping companies to establish themselves in the Netherlands. And I was happy to learn this morning that 90% of the companies in Israel, the fintech sector, have global aspirations. And so I guess 90% of you here in this room have global growth aspirations, and we're here to help you consider the Netherlands as an entry point, at least into the European market.
Thank you very much. For both of you. And thanks for joining me. And, the first question we want to start with is, we talked about the influence and the effect, the impact that COVID-19 had on the international fintech landscape. How do you see that trend moving forward? How do you see the impact of COVID-19, even now when it's almost over? What did we get out of it in terms of the international fintech landscape and go-to-market strategies of fintech companies in the world?
Well, I think it's given a big boost to the digitalization of our whole society, and many groups in society have now become familiar with arranging things online. And I think this has created a much more conducive landscape for fintech in general. So I think the market as a whole has grown tremendously. People have become more familiar with doing things online. But at the same time, I think that it has been, the technologies, they have of course evolved to be bottleneck issues like security and identification. But I think also that, let's say, for real breakthrough innovations, it's really good that we now can actually also physically get together again. Because I think physical meetings between people is where new ideas emerge.
Thanks so much. That's interesting.
Well, as Elmar said, obviously COVID massively accelerated digitalization, and that which makes sense. We were forced to stay at home, do our lives online. and therefore the technologies offered by FinTech found even greater use. I think it's interesting that we've noticed in the UK, and I presume the trend probably stretches worldwide, is that we've raised or created a new generation of really financially astute people. Of course, nobody understands how to manage money better than those which don't have much of it, and the financial hardship many experienced during COVID, particularly younger people in less secure jobs, has really kind of forced them, I suppose, to take financial matters into their own hands and to search for better, cheaper, more effective solutions. And that's why I think FinTech has really found its place even more so.
Thanks for that, and I fully agree. You know, we sometimes see, we talked about this morning as well, we sometimes see also Israeli fintech companies that are not operating in Israel at all. Even though they are in teams, not saying they are not distributing their products to Israeli clients, they're not working. So we can indicate some of them. I mean, Torah, for example, is an outstanding Israeli fintech startup rocking around the world, not working in Israel, not serving Israeli clients. Tifalti, that people from the AWS panel, I think they mentioned Tifalti as well, outstanding company working on with US clients. So, you know, if we talk about, if we try to analyze that, and if we talk about Israeli companies penetrating new markets, and I think, Elmar, that's what you do with the Invest in Holland, you also help different companies to distribute their products in Holland. What do you say will be the best the best way to go for an Israeli startup to distribute this product nowadays in the post-COVID era?
Well, first of all, I think Israel is technology-wise very much ahead in a number of areas in FinTech that are really key. I mentioned already cybersecurity, identification, biometrics. So I think Israel has a lot to offer to our markets in Europe. That's one thing. I think many of these technologies are applicable universally, but they still need partners to really, scale them throughout Europe. And that's something that we can help with, to connect them to the large banks, the large insurance companies, and other financial service providers that can work with it. Because of course there are still differences between markets. And within Europe, it's actually 28 different, or 27, I should say, different national markets. Although a lot of regulations are harmonized, and that makes it an interesting market, I think. But the cultural differences between markets are still different. And that's why companies also need to be physically in Europe to understand that. One example, for instance, credit cards are hardly used in our country. We have a very elaborate debit card system in our country. So your system needs to be able to work with that elaborate debit card system that we have in our country. And like that, every national country in Europe still also has its national characteristics of the payment system. So for that, companies really need to be physically in Europe, and that's what we encourage and what we support every day.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, well, as we all know, Israel is, of course, a massive centre of FinTech, and as you said, particularly within the realms of cybersecurity and that kind of field. I think the real kind of benefit that Israeli FinTech firms can get from, particularly cooperation with the UK market, is tapping into expertise, which somewhat not behind in, but not quite as strong. So in the case of UK, that probably open banking. And we've seen a lot of cooperation between UK and Israeli firms in that field, because UK is probably the global leader in banking. So like you said, I think that comes down to cooperation, it comes down to a physical presence in the country, it comes down to working with partners. And we've seen a lot of it, I'm sure that will continue.
Thanks for that. And here we're talking about the UK as a fintech hub, Israel as a fintech hub. What can you say about the rest of the world? Which countries are the best fintech hubs you know, and what are their expertise in terms of subsegments of fintech? What's your opinion about it?
Well, you mentioned two very important ones already, Israel and the UK. I think the Netherlands also has interesting players. We have some of the largest payments companies in the world, India and Mali, for instance, were born and raised in the Netherlands and have grown globally. So I think in payments we have a strong ecosystem. But also, let's say, the global networks that we have in trade and finance, I think offer an interesting scaling opportunity for fintech companies. In addition to that, we have, for instance, the Hague Security Delta. That's an ecosystem very much like FinTech, which was presented this morning very well by Stachowiak. We have a similar physical congregation of companies in the cybertech era, and I would personally think it would be very interesting for industries to value, if you will, of cybertech.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's very natural that certain geographies and certain locations will develop expertise and specialities. Yeah, that's the same in every market, every industry. And we are seeing new hubs emerge. Miami is emerging as a massive hub for crypto. Singapore is a massive fintech. I suppose I should find the flag for the UK, which, as I said, is a huge open banking centre. Ever since 2018 PSD2 regulation, which made open banking a regulatory requirement for financial firms. Yeah, we've seen huge growth in the space. I think particularly an interesting point to me because of successful cooperation between the public and the private sector. So we had the government Clynch review, which put forward a number of recommendations for the UK government to consider. We've had a sandbox led by the UK Treasury and considerable amounts of money invested as well. And I think the UK with open banking has demonstrated how governments and public sector can work really effectively with fintech firms in the private sector to achieve really good results. I think that's probably a lesson for any hub looking to achieve some results.
Yeah, I fully agree. We might also add on top of that insurtech segment. UK is also a great insurtech hub. I would say also Germany with very interesting insurance solutions, as well as the Hong Kong, which is a closer look at and take a look at our Asian colleagues. But saying that, we saw different, and I talked about it earlier with my presentation about different subsegments of it that got boosted thanks to the COVID-19 situation. Even the insurance space, when we got user-based insurance, car insurance that you don't pay if you don't drive, basically different solutions that got much more, I would say, sophisticated thanks to the COVID-19 situation. What would you say we should expect next? Which innovations are yet introduced to the general public, but we can see that we are going there? What do you see in your regions?
Well, you mentioned insurance, and it's interesting that just very recently a large American company came to the Netherlands and was able to introduce an insurance for independent drivers, which has been a very growing market segment in the Netherlands. And they were unable to get insurance, and this technology was able now to get them insured. So that's one example of a whole new part of society that's being covered by FinTech. But looking ahead, I think I see a number of important trends, at least, that I think will materialize also in terms of FinTech solutions. Integrations were mentioned already a number of times. I mean, we still have a large number of FinTech companies that are focusing on payments or wealth management or insurance. But I think increasingly users want to have all these solutions in one app, and maybe also an AI, an artificial intelligence support system to help them make the best solutions and the best decisions for their money management. So I think integration in general is a very important trend that we're still in the beginning of. The second one, I think, is what I call impact. Consumers, at least in Europe, I think, and certainly in the Netherlands, want to know also what their money is doing to society and to the environment. And so I think the accountability of financial services providers for what they are doing with the money of their clients, I think, will be something that's also very important to be able to demonstrate, not just to claim, but also really to demonstrate what your money has done, for instance, for CO2 reduction or for a better environment or against child labor. And the third one, I think, is an ongoing, well, that's maybe not the right word, but certainly an area of going back and forth between what's, let's say, technologically possible and what's economically or socially desirable. And what I mean with that is, do we not exclude certain parts of the society by the solutions that we're offering? Are certain parts of the society not being, let's say, excluded from credits, for instance, based on let's say their postal code or their ethnicity or their nationality? So I think, and regulators, I think, in Europe are also very keen on this to make sure that FinTech has also a positive economic and society impact.
Okay, we agree, especially on the ESG remark, when you see environmental, social, and governance in general, different aspects of different, I would say, sustainability reasons that are being pushed and backed by governments. That's great, and impact fintech solutions are becoming much more accessible to everyone.
So it's a similar point to that, actually. I think that one of the big trends we're going to see take on even more importance is financial inclusion. And I think that is one area where FinTech really will add huge amounts of value. There's a lot of work going on with the World Bank and central banks globally to bring more people into the formal financial system. 1.2 billion people were added between 2011 and 2017. I think the updated figures are due soon. But I think we're going to see a huge amount of cooperation between FinTech firms, central banks, and international organizations like the World Bank. So onboard billions of more customers in very isolated regions around the world. That would involve biometric companies to help onboard people in new and innovative ways, using new technologies to reach areas that the traditional banks can't or won't. I think we're going to see a lot of advances in terms of payments. And yeah, I think we're just going to see a huge amount of cooperation and innovation going on. And that will help some of the workforce people. So I think that's a really exciting development in FinTech, and one that will be hugely important.
Thanks very much. Thanks for that. And yeah, we definitely see a trend when fintechs are becoming much less disruptive and want to be much more collaborative with the financial industry. As well, with open banking, open innovation programs, PSD2, etc., we see different financial institutions that want to have more extensive collaborations with fintechs. So we definitely see it is going there. The recognition that fintech helps us and not just harm us, even if there are challenger banks out there that are actually competing the financial inclusion. Before we wrap it up, gentlemen, and thanks very much for your comments so far, maybe we'll take it a step forward to the future of fintech the way we see it. How do you see in the mid-range and long term the future of fintech? What should we expect?
Well, I think one thing I'd point out is that despite all the progress we've made, there are huge swathes of finance that still remain very archaic, particularly with stock exchanges, and we've done a lot of work on debt capital markets. A lot of the processes remain very bureaucratic, very manual, lots of paperwork involved, in a way that now seems extremely outdated, given the progress we've made. So I think artificial intelligence will have a big role to play in automating a lot of those kind of processes. I think McKinsey actually estimates that AI will generate an additional $1 trillion of revenue and value for FinTech. So I think we're just going to see more of the same. I think we're going to see FinTech revolutionising and modernising huge waves of finance that haven't yet probably went that far. That's good for us.
I agree, and I would maybe add that I see furthermore an integration of FinTech with other verticals in society, for instance, in the agricultural production chain. I think FinTech is still very much driven by technology and finance, but I think FinTech also needs to bring in the expertise of other sectors to really optimize its work to support, for instance, agricultural production chains. And I mean choosing the crops, planning of the, let's say, the production, the whole throughput of agricultural produce through the society right up until the end consumer. So I think I see personally a big growth area for FinTech is to really understand the other verticals in society, the dynamics that are important there, the technologies that are important there, in order to really integrate that into those verticals.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I would like to thank you for joining me today.